All right, so it's a chilly, overcast day here at Gray Whale Cove. Not a lot of wind, so that's kind of nice. But I'm gonna experiment with color again today. I'll be painting over an old 16 by 20 inch painting, and I've got my usual palette of colors here, although I have squeezed out a few extras. I've got some Viridian here, some quinacridone magenta, cadmium red, Indian yellow, and cadmium orange, and then also some sap green. Here's the scene I'll be working from. As usual, I'll be changing some of the shapes for compositional purposes, and I plan to add quite a bit more color than I'm seeing. I'm starting with a mixture of ultramarine blue and quinacridone magenta. I'm just going to establish this tree in the foreground really quickly. So I sketched out an outline and now just filling it in. This is a composition I've done before, but I've never been happy with the color of my previous paintings of this scene. Part of the reason is I was painting on a gray day like this, and gray days can be very difficult just because the colors are not so inspiring. But I am not worried about being accurate with colors today. I'm just playing around with saturation, and I think I'm going to go with the same approach I went with last week, which was to try to make sure that my colors are primaries or secondaries, no grays, and also I'm not going to use medium. So I'll just be using paint straight out of the tube. For the headlands, I'm starting with permanent red medium. Pretty scary. I feel like red is the most difficult color to work into a painting just because it's so bold, and there's potential for it to clash with other colors. I am scrubbing on a rather thin layer here so I can come over with a different color. Maybe a darker color, I'm not sure. But having this red as a starting point is kind of fun. And as I mentioned, I've not thinned the paint at all. I'm using a number 6 natural bristle flat. For the water, I'm starting with a mixture of phthalo blue and titanium white. So this morning before I came out painting, I looked in my paint drawer at home and I pulled out a bunch of colors that I haven't used in years or experimented with and didn't like them. And so those are the extras that I've included on my palette today. One color that I cannot do without is phthalo blue. Also ultramarine blue. Those two blues are indispensable. For this distant bit of land, I've got ultramarine blue and a bit of quinacridone magenta. I bought a tube of quinacridone magenta to potentially replace my alizarin crimson because it's more light fast, but I did not like the color because it was too saturated. But now that I'm embracing saturation, I'm kind of enjoying this color. Actually, that yellow sky is kind of cool. Now I've got a mixture of Viridian and some cadmium yellow medium. Viridian's another color that I haven't had much luck with. It is similar to phthalo green, but yeah, in the past I just did not like the color at all. But we'll see how it goes today. I don't normally have greens on my palette. I like to mix my own greens using the blues and yellows on my palette. I'm going with a fairly dark mixture at this point, but I do think I'm going to try to keep most of my colors around a mid-tone, just because when the colors are at a mid-tone or higher, I feel like the color is more visible. When you've got a really dark value, it's hard to tell what color it is. I am squinting at the scene, trying to reduce it into simple shapes as usual. I'm gonna paint this scene as if it were a sunny day, and so I'm painting in a shadow, and I'm using ultramarine blue and quinacridone magenta. I'm noticing that when you don't use medium, you go through a lot more paint, especially blue and white. I usually load my palette at the car and leave my paints in the car, but with blue and white, I always do bring a tube in my backpack just in case. If you want to be left alone when plein air painting, paint with colors like this. I'm noticing that nobody is commenting on my painting and people are afraid to come over and look. It's kind of funny. I think to the average viewer, a good painting is a painting that looks like a photograph. But after you've been painting for a while, your taste obviously matures, and then a painting that looks like a photograph is not as appealing. There's a little bit of sand visible on the beach here. And I'm using a mixture of Indian yellow, cadmium yellow medium, burnt sienna. I think that's it. For the whitewater, I'm going with a mix of quinacridone magenta and titanium white. I might keep some of these bits of color from the previous painting. There's little bits of aqua here and a sort of purplish color. All right, stepping back again, and I think I am gonna leave the sky yellow. The whole point is to experiment and not judge. In other words, if I like it, I leave it. A child would not hesitate to paint a sky yellow or green or any other color. But as adults, we sort of judge and say, oh, we can't do that, and can't paint the sky yellow or pink or green. But you can, of course you can. And after all, it's only a painting. It's not like it's a big deal. It's one thing that's interesting, the fear of failure with art. It's not like we're really risking all that much. If it doesn't turn out, who cares? But I do think we feel very vulnerable when painting, especially if you're plein air painting. And I think plein air painting actually helps you get over the fear of worrying about what people think. I've had probably 20 people walk by and nobody has said anything. And I love that. I think it's so funny. Under normal circumstances, almost everybody says hello. So I think I'm having the Van Gogh effect on people. I heard that people looked at Van Gogh's paintings and thought he was a lunatic. In fact, the children in the village would throw old produce at him, like heads of cabbage and that sort of thing. Mixing up a light green for the plants in the foreground, and I'm using sap green, which is appears to be a transparent green, and I'm adding some cadmium yellow lemon to the mix. This green might be a bit too light in value, but you can always darken it up. And some green over here. And for the tree to the right, I'm going to mix in some cadmium yellow medium instead of the cadmium yellow lemon. It's a little bit warmer of a green. Working back into the tree here, the dark mixture of ultramarine blue and quinacridone magenta. There's a nice complementary relationship here between this purplish blue and the yellow of the sky. I know I mentioned this last week, but painting with color like this is actually very enjoyable. It does feel like play. It's actually starting to rain out here, which was not in the forecast. So it may cut my painting adventure a little bit short, which is okay. All right, so here's what I finished up with. This painting took about an hour and a half to complete. It was finished on site. I decided to tone down the saturation on the cliffs to the left in order to create a sense of depth. When the paint was at full saturation, I wasn't getting the depth that I wanted. So I did tone down the red using a mixture of titanium white and dioxazine purple, but I tried to maintain as much saturation as possible. I just desaturated enough to get the depth that I wanted, but still tried to keep some red color in those cliffs. My goal with this painting mostly was to play with color, but I still wanted to have a strong composition and a convincing feeling of light. And I think that the saturated colors do create a radiance and a feeling of light that's maybe more pronounced than when I'm using my usual approach to color, which is obviously a bit more grayed down. Anytime I alter my painting process or experiment with new techniques, it takes a while for me to decide how I feel about the results. So I just keep my paintings out where I can see them and live with them and give it time and just allow myself to adjust to the new look, so to speak. And oftentimes there's paintings that I finish and I think it's a total fail, and then 2 weeks later I actually love the painting. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep these paintings out and live with them, but I'm having a great time experimenting with color. As I mentioned in the previous video, I think it's a great thing to do when there's more saturation. The relationships become more critical, so I would say definitely give it a try. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. There's also a PayPal tip jar down below. It's the PayPal tips and the Patreon that help keep me making these videos, and it's much appreciated. So check it out. Other than that, stay creative. I'll see you guys in the next video.